Can you? Hello, everyone. I will be starting in a second. Just getting my laptop set up. Battery died. The Kohelet was authored by Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon. With one of his books. We're here. It's a book of wisdom, and it kind of goes at the end of the book. He says, after all the wisdom and everything, the only thing that really matters is fear of God. That's how he finishes up. But in this book, he writes here. We're holding source number 2 in the chat. You can see the sources that we're quoting. So it says like this: "But boker zra zaracha, sow your seed, plant your seed in the morning, ola arav, and in the evening, al tanach yedacha. Do not hold back your hand in the evening. I mean, don't stop. Just because you plowed in the morning, don't think that that's enough. Keep on plowing, even until the evening. Why? Because you do not know which one is going to succeed, which one will last. Hazeh ozeh. Is it this one or the other one? Or if both are equally good." So that's the verse. Okay, it's again very simply it's talking about when you plant, don't just plant once and say, "Oh, I did it, that's it, I'm finished, I don't have to plant again." Keep on planting until the evening, because you don't know which one of your plantings will be successful. That's the verse. Now, based on this verse, we have a piece of the Talmud here. So that now we're going back to the first source. It's Yevamot, Tractate Yevamot, which officially discusses a unique case which you might have heard of, where there are 2 brothers. One of them was married and died without any children. So there's a mitzvah that his wife, the widow, should marry the brother of the deceased. And that's a whole mitzvah and topic on its own. I'm sure most of you have heard about it. So that's the name of the tractate, Yevama. But in there it discusses the mitzvah of having children, and that's what we're going to read here. So the Gemara comments, so I'll just read in the English. The Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua. As the Mishnah says, if someone has children, once they have a boy, a girl, whatever, so then they don't, there's no mitzvah anymore to have more children. So they say this mission is not it doesn't fit with the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua. For it was taught in the Brisa that Rabbi Yeshua says, if a man married a woman in his youth and she passed away, he should marry another woman in his old age. And if he had children in his youth, he should have more children in his old age. As it is stated, and he quotes the verse we just read before: "In the morning sow your seed, and in the evening do not withhold your hand, for you do not know which shall prosper, whether this or that, or whether they both alike shall be good." And the commentary finishes off here. This verse indicates that a man should continue having children even after he's fulfilled the mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply. So basically you see what happened is that Rabbi Yeshua is interpreting this verse, which again is simply talking about seeds planting, but he takes it as a parable almost. It's really trying to say that a person should not just say, "Oh, I planted seeds, I had children when I was younger, and that's enough." so speaking, like I said, planting in the morning, and that's enough. Rather, to continue having children even into, so to speak, old age, um, to the evening. Why? And it says because you don't know if the children will prosper. Now, the translation here is prosper, but the way it's interpreted by many of the commentaries, what it means is that, unfortunately, especially those days, as you can imagine, uh, people long life wasn't necessarily so common. Uh, so people would pass away young, and therefore, you don't know. Even if you had one or two, three children, it could be unfortunate that one of them will pass away. And we are going to read soon that if a child passes away, so even though you gave birth to a few children, but if they pass away in your lifetime, then you kind of have to do the mitzvah again, because the whole idea of the mitzvah is to build a human life on this world. And if that didn't happen, if unfortunately one of them passed away, then the person has a mitzvah to have more children. So therefore, again, it's like a kind of like advice saying you have an obligation to have more children, because you don't know, maybe one or two, God forbid, of the children will pass away, and therefore the person has an obligation to continue having children. That is this piece of the Talmud. Okay, so seemingly here's the source of the idea of having continuing to have children even after just the basic boy, son and daughter, boy and girl. And the reason is, again, because the person has we're worried that maybe the one of the children unfortunately will pass away, and then they will take away from the mitzvah. So just to keep on having more children. That is the piece of the Talmud. Now, I'm going to read to you the Rambam. Unfortunately, for no reason, Svarya didn't have the English translation for these pieces from Maimonides, from the Rambam. So I don't have it here for you. I do know a website that has it, but I didn't have a chance to copy paste it from a different website. But for now, this will suffice. I'll just read it to you. It says, how many children how many children does a person need to give birth to and fulfill the mitzvah of be fruitful and multiply? So it says, Zachar and a Keva, a boy and a girl, a male and a female. Like it says in the verse, Zachar and a Keva, Hashem created mankind by creating a male and a female. So that's considered continuing human life in this world, having a son and a daughter. Now he starts off the next halacha. No dulai umesu. If they were born, he had a boy and a girl, but umesu, unfortunately, they died. But they left their own children, meaning this person had grandchildren. So then, that's still considered fulfilling the mitzvah, because he has grandchildren, and grandchildren are like children in this context. I think it goes into specifics of how that works exactly. But what you see from here is that if unfortunately there were no grandchildren, so there were children, and then they passed away, then that would mean that the mitzvah was not fulfilled, and he would have the obligation to have more children. That is that part of Maimonides of the Rambam. Now here comes the Maimonides, the main one that we're going to focus on. Number 5, the last source that we have here. He writes like this: even though someone fulfilled the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiplying, meaning he had a son and a daughter, he's obligated, he's commanded midivrei seifrim, from the scribes, meaning from the rabbis, not to be idle in being fruitful and multiplying. Meaning, in other words, not to stop having children. As long as he has the koach, the strength, the ability to have children. To call hamosiv nefesh achas b'Yisrael, anyone that adds one Jewish person, one Jewish soul amongst the Jewish nation, ki'ilu bana elam. That's as if he built a world. Again, it's the reason why a person should continue having children even after fulfilling the basic commandment is He says because anyone that adds a Jewish person in this world is as if he built a world. Anyone that adds a Jewish soul amongst the Jews as if he built a world. That's what he writes. Just an interesting fact. The next part of the halacha, the law, he writes it's also a commandment that a person should not be unmarried. Talking about a male specifically, it's not good for him not to have a wife because it could lead to not good things. That's the end of it. That's not relevant to our conversation. Again, he writes, I'm going to say in English again, even though someone fulfilled the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiply, he still has a commandment from the scribes and the rabbis not to stop having children if he's able, as long as he's able to, because anyone that adds a Jewish soul amongst the nation is as if he built a world. That is the Rambam. So we have a bunch of questions on this Rambam that we're going to ask. Question number one. If you notice, the Rambam here wrote a different reason for why a person should have more than just a son and a daughter, should continue having children. What's the reason? In the Talmud we read, because it's like the verse from Koheles that even though you planted in the morning, you should continue planting in the evening, because you don't know which ones will last, which ones will survive, which one of your plantings will survive, which Rabbi Shua took that to mean you don't know which children will survive, and therefore there's the obligation to continue having children. That is the Talmud. Maimonides, the Rambam, he said something very different. He said, why should a person continue having children? Because anyone that adds another soul amongst the nation of the Jews is as if he built a world. That's a totally different reason than the Talmud. The Talmud is, again, because in your mitzvah itself of fulfilling, being fruitful and multiply, we're not going to say worried, but just in case, unfortunately, one of them pass away, there'll be more children. But Maimonides, the Rabbi, he gives a totally different reason, that it's we just like adding as many Jews as possible to the Jewish nation. So the more the better, and therefore and he says it's so monumental, so important, as if he built a whole world just by giving birth to one person. So therefore there's an obligation to continue having children as much as possible, as long as possible. So the question is again, why does Maimonides he gives a totally different reason that was written in the Talmud? Now, just a interesting fact is that it's quite common, I'm not saying all the time, but it's more common than any other commentary to when Rambam writes a mitzvah and a reason, he might sometimes write his own reason. And that's like a general thing that's known about the Rambam. And not always does he quote the reason that's given in the Talmud. But for here specifically, if you think about it, he writes, why does a person have an obligation to keep on having children? Because it's so important to have to bring in as many human beings into the world. It's as if he built a world. But that's not a reason to obligate someone. Imagine we're not all superheroes and building worlds, etc. You can't necessarily seem that it's not a reason. That's not strong enough of a reason to make someone have an obligation to have as many children as possible. It's a nice thing, it's a beautiful thing, it's an amazing thing, it's important, it's monumental, it's building worlds, but it's not necessarily something that would obligate someone halachically to have as many children. So why does the question again is, why does the Rambam, Maimonides, leave the reason that's given in the Talmud itself, which is hundreds of years before him, which writes clearly a reason that it's just in case some of the children pass away, and it's based on a verse from the Bible, from Tani, from Koheles. So why does the Rambam give his own reason, which doesn't really explain the obligation? Maybe it explains a reason to have as many children as possible. It doesn't explain the obligation to have as many children as possible. Okay, that's question number one. Question number two. If you look in the specific wording, again, you don't have it in English, so unfortunately I can't show it to you clearly, but the Rambam writes that anyone that adds a Jewish nefesh, neshama, amongst the Jews is as if he built a world. So the question that's asked is, why does he say Mosif, anyone that adds? It should say anyone that gives birth to a child, another child, as if he built the world. Why does it say anyone that adds another child? What's this idea of adding? If you look at he says anyone that adds as if he built the world. So maybe he should say anyone that adds a soul as if he added a world or something like that. What's this? So obviously we see that there's something specific about this word adding. Adding a soul, not giving birth to a soul, rather adding a soul. What's that for? Question number three. There's another Maimonides. I don't have time to add it to the sheet, but the Rambam writes of somewhere else that when a person is having relationships with his wife, part of his intention should be that to have children. Why? Why should he want to have children? So he writes, because perhaps this person will be. He writes that perhaps this person will be a great sage. Will be very vital to the Jewish nation, whichever this future child. So instead of holding back, a person should say, "Oh, look, I have an opportunity to perhaps give birth to the next Moshe Rabbeinu." It doesn't have to be so extreme, but the next great Jewish leader or someone that can have such a effect and contribute so much to the Jewish nation. That is what the Rambam writes somewhere else. So the question is, why does the Rambam not use that reason here? You know what? Maybe you don't like the reason of the Talmud. Fine, but this is a beautiful reason. To have as many children as possible, because you never know what they can contribute to society, what they can contribute to the Jewish nation. Why does the Rambam? He writes this idea somewhere else. Why does he not use that here? That's another question. And the final question we're going to ask on this Rambam Maimonides is, the way he writes this whole law about having as many children as possible is very different than the way it's written in the Talmud. The way it's written in the Talmud, and you can look back at the source, it says, Yeshua, as it's taught in the Bright, Yeshua says, if a man married a woman in his youth and she passed away, he should marry another woman. If he had children in his youth, he should have children in his old age. Why does Maimonides totally change from that whole style, that whole language, and say, oh, anyone, even though someone fulfilled the mitzvah, he still by having a son and a daughter, he's still commanded to have as many children as possible, as long as he's able to. Why does it change from, again, the way it's written in the Talmud is, if you had children, still have more. Here it's written differently. Like, even though you fulfilled the mitzvah, you still have an obligation. Why does he say it very differently than even just the structure of the law? Forget about the reason. Okay, maybe you want to write a different reason. Why does the Rambam writing like a whole different thing? In general, it's very common for the Rambam Maimonides to quote the case the way it's written in the Talmud. Why should he change it? So that's the question here: is why does he write very differently in the way it's written in the Talmud? Again, the Talmud is written like, if someone that had children when he was in his youth should still have children in his old age. That's the way it's written. Here it's written very differently. Even though someone fulfilled the mitzvah, he's still commanded to have more children. Those are the questions on the Rambam, on Maimonides. Now, I'll go straight to the answer. There's more to say, like attempted answer, and let's say no, it's not a good answer. Maybe if we have extra time, we'll do that. For now, we'll go straight to the answer. So it goes like this. There's a famous idea in general. We all know that there's the biblical obligations, and then there's what the rabbis added. Many things it's like that. For example, Sukkot. There's a mitzvah on Sukkot to shake the lulav and etrog. You have to take the four different plants, whatever, and put it together and shake it. That's the mitzvah of lulav. Now, in the Torah, it says to shake the lulav it only says that that it needs to be done on the first day of Sukkot. But the said, we should do it every day of Sukkot. There's so many things where the rabbis, added onto a mitzvah. Again, they don't say it's a new mitzvah or like God said this. They say it's the rabbis that are saying it. That's why it's not adding on to Torah. But the rabbi, there's many things where there's the biblical obligation, there's the rabbinic obligation. The rabbis added anything as a safeguard or this, or for whatever reason they added it. So there's a known every time you hear a law, an obligation from the rabbis, there's always, how does that work? Is it is an extension of the mitzvah, meaning there's a biblical obligation, and then there's the up to a certain point, and the rabbis added that, they extended it to a further point. Is that how it's looked at, or do we say, oh, it's like a separate, there's a mitzvah, so let's say to shake lulav, and there also is a rabbinic obligation to shake lulav on the rest of the days. Again, there's a mitzvah to shake lulav on the first day of Sukkot, and there's another mitzvah, another obligation from the rabbis to shake on the rest of the days, but not necessarily connected to the first one. It's not an extension. Obviously, it's very similar, but not necessarily is it an extension to the biblical mitzvah. So again, that's the general discussion. Every time you see rabbinic obligation, it's good to take notice. Is it an extension of the biblical mitzvah, or is it a new, kind of like a separate thing? Now it depends which mitzvahs look at different ways. We're not going to get into the general topic of this, but specifically we're going to apply it specifically to our mitzvah that we're learning about here. So again, what do we have here? There's a mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply. What is that? The biblical obligation is to have a son and a daughter, like you said, a boy and a girl. That is the biblical obligation. And the rabbis we see are adding an obligation to continue having children even beyond just the boy and the girl. That's what we have here. Now, how do we look at that? Do we look at it as an extension, meaning the Torah, the biblical obligation is up to here? It's boy, girl, that's it, that's the minimum. And the rabbis are adding, not only up to here, continue having children, even further than that. It's all the same mitzvah of being fruitful and multiply. Again, the Torah says being fruitful and multiply means son and daughter. And the rabbis say, we want you to do more than that. For the reasons that are given, whether what's in the Talmud or the Rambam, whatever the reason is, for the rabbis to say to have more children, but they say to continue having children. That's one way to look at it. Or do you say that no, there's a mitzvah to have a son and a daughter? They have to be fruitful and multiply. And there's a second obligation, to have as many children as possible from the rabbis, from the scribes. For whatever reason, again, whether it's just in case, it's like a safeguard to make sure that no matter what, even if God forbid some of the children pass away, there'll still be more, or is it because, like Rambam writes, and you might give birth to the next Jewish leader, or like he writes here, sorry about that. Sorry about that. Or is it just like a separate obligation? There's two options. Is it an extension of the mitzvah? You're not only be fruitful and multiply means son and daughter, but it also means continuing to have more. Or is it a separate obligation that, after you finish that mitzvah, the rabbi said, we have another thing we want you to do, as to continue having more children. That is the two ways of looking at it. Now, this sounds like maybe it sounds a little petty. What's the difference? Who cares? The point is, there's an obligation to have more children. Who cares? What's the, how do you look at it? It's very very nitty gritty about, is it extension or is it its own thing? The point is, there's an obligation. So so every time we have one of these, it's called a chakira. Every time we have we're not sure, is it this way or that way? Even though we know the actual law, the law is to have as many children. But you can have a chakira, like looking into how exactly this law, like what's the structure, what's the fiber, so to speak, what's the material of this law. Whenever you have that, there's always going to be a nafka mina. That's the Hebrew words we use. There's going to be an outcome, a practical case where there will be a difference, where there will be a halachic difference. What is that in this case? There's a law that if someone's poor or whatever, and therefore it's getting in the way of them getting married, they can't support a wife, children, etc. No one wants to marry them for however you want to play out the scenario exactly. The point is, by them getting some more cash, that will help them get married. So there's a law that in general, a person that owns a Sefer Torah, actual Sefer Torah, cannot sell it. Let's say, for example, you can't. It's not an asset. You don't look at it as a Sefer Torah as an asset. I want to buy Twitter, so I'm going to sell my Sefer Torahs. It's not like that. It's not an asset. It's very demeaning to do that to Sefer Torah. And there's laws that you can't just sell a Torah like that. There's other things different. You can't different levels of hierarchy. What's higher than what could be sold for what. We're not going to get into all of that. That's a separate discussion. But again, there's a mitzvah not to sell, or a halakha, you're not allowed to sell a Sefer Torah for anything. One of the only things you could sell a Sefer Torah for is to get married. If in order to get married, a person needs to sell a Sefer Torah to get the money for that. Which, by the way, Sefer Torahs are very expensive. I'm sure you know. I don't know with inflation now, but they're $40,000. Could be more. I don't know if anyone had experience with that. So a person, in order to get married and needs to sell off his Torah, he can do that. First of all, that just brings out the importance of getting married in Torah's view. It says the Rabbi spoke about it this past Shabbos in his sermon. We're not going to get into that, but that's the law. Again, that a person can sell a Torah in order to help him get married. So now, this is the question. Someone already had a son and a daughter, so he fulfilled his obligation to be fruitful and multiply. He already has a son and a daughter, but now he wants to get married. For whatever reason, he doesn't have a wife, and now he wants to get married. Can he sell a Torah in order to get a new wife, or not? So again, Stephen would say, "Oh, yeah, of course, because the Torah wants you to have more children." But here comes the difference. When did we say you're allowed to sell a Sefer Torah? In order, as part of the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiply, of getting married and having children, so you could sell a Sefer Torah. But if we say that the obligation to have more children, as many children as possible, is not an extension of the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiply, rather it's its own obligation. The rabbis created an obligation to have as many children as possible, but it's not an extension of the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiply, then you would not be allowed to sell Sefer Torah for that purpose. Because it's nothing, what you're doing now, having more children, is not part of that biblical mitzvah of being fruitful and multiply. So then you would not be allowed to sell Sefer Torah. But if you say that the obligation to sell, the obligation to have as many children as possible is just an extension. The biblical level is to this point, son and daughter. And the rabbi said, no, we want you to have more. But it's really all part of one mitzvah, just a further extension, a rabbinical, added extension. Then you would be able to sell a Sefer Torah for this purpose, to have more than just a son and a daughter, because it's all part of this mitzvah of being fruitful and multiply. That's in Hebrew that we call that a nafka mina. That's a case where an outcome of this nitpicking that we're doing. Is it an extension or is it separate? Seemingly, again, it seems irrelevant. The point is, there's an obligation to have as many children as possible. But here we're finding there's a case where it would make a difference. When it comes to someone who doesn't have money and wants to sell his Torah in order to get married, so if he already fulfilled the mitzvah of be fruitful, multiply, and there's nothing else left of that mitzvah, he already fulfilled it, then he would not be able to sell the Torah. But if you say again that it's an extension of that mitzvah to have as many children as possible, then of course he would be allowed to sell the Torah for that purpose, to have as many children as possible. Okay, that is the two ways of thinking when it comes to this obligation to have as many children as possible. Again, is an extension or a separate thing. Now, how does this have to do with the Rambam? So, if you look at the Rambam, it seems pretty clear that he holds that it's an extension of the mitzvah. Unlike the Talmud we'll get to that soon. But he learns that it's an extension of the mitzvah being fruitful and multiply. And if you look, that's the way he starts off. He says, even though a person fulfilled the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiply, he's still commanded to continue. Yeah, not to stop being fruitful and multiply. He has to continue this mitzvah. So you see, that's point one, where you see clearly that he holds that it's just an extension. But also, based on all the questions we ask, we'll be able to answer them if we say this fact that the Rambam holds it's an extension of the mitzvah. How does it answer all the questions? So here we go. Again, let's go through the questions in order. The Rambam said, we asked a question on the Rambam, why does he change the reason? The Talmud gives a reason why a person should continue having children is because maybe, God forbid, some of them will pass away, so he'll have more children, so to speak, there, so that he makes sure he fulfills the mitzvah. The Rambam gave a totally different reason that if any soul that's brought into this world is as if it's building a whole new world. It's an amazing, beautiful thing. Totally different reason. Why does he do that? So it's very, very simple, because he doesn't hold like the Talmud. The Talmud says the Talmud. I guess we can't get into the Talmud so much. We're gonna run out of time. But basically, he learns that the Talmud was talking about the way the Talmud was learning is that it's a separate obligation. You fulfill the mitzvah, and it's a separate obligation, to make sure that mitzvah is protected, like insurance almost, to have more children. But he learned that it's really an extension. That's why he gives his reason specifically. His reason is that he says, like, it's as if you build a world. Yeah, what's the whole mitzvah of being fruitful and multiply? Yeah, where do we see it in the Torah? Told Adam, when Adam was created, he said how to have children. Yeah, keep the human, build a human race, build a human society. Same thing, another after the flood. Sorry, someone's kept on calling me. After the flood, so it says that God told Noah when he left the ark to have children. Noah and his sons to continue having children, to build the human race that was just decimated by the flood. So it's all about building. The mitzvah of being fruitful and multiply is about building the human race. Let's just say. So when the Rambam writes, anytime you add another soul, it's as if you build a world. As if you build. He uses that word build, as if you're building the human race, building a world. So you see how he learns that it's an extension. And why does he say it's an extension of the mitzvah? Because of his reasoning. The reason is because it's as if you build a world. So that's why he gives a different reason than the Talmud. And now to answer the second question, he says anyone that adds children, because in the Rambam's mind, it's just an extension. You fulfilled the mitzvah, now you're adding to that mitzvah. You had a son and a daughter, and you're adding to that same mitzvah of having children, being fruitful and multiply. You're adding more. Again, because it's all in his perspective that it's an extension. So you're adding to that mitzvah. It's not a separate obligation. You're adding, and that's why he uses that specific language of adding. Doesn't say give birth to children. It says you're adding children because you're adding to that mitzvah. The third question we said is why is the Rambam somewhere else writes a reason to have children is because you never know. That child might be the next, might contribute so much to the Jewish nation. So that is a beautiful reason to have more children, but that's not part of the obligation of being fruitful and multiply. That's a beautiful reason. That's another reason. But in this context specifically, the Rambam is trying to say that it's an extension of the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiply, and therefore he doesn't use that reason, which is not relevant to being fruitful and multiply. It's relevant to contribute. Maybe that child will be a great person, but that's something else. That's not an extension of being fruitful and multiply, and therefore he doesn't use that reason. And the same thing for number 4. Question number 4, we asked, why does he write a whole new language, a whole new statement, very different than the way it's written in the Talmud? Is because, in very short, the way he understands, like we said before, the way he understands the Talmud is that the Talmud is saying it's a separate. This idea of having many children, as many as possible, is a separate obligation, not an extension. That's where Rabbi Yeshua, that's what the Talmud was saying, and that's why I use that verse specifically. But he holds that it's a whole different thing. What he's saying here about having many children, it's not based on that Talmud right there. It's based on a different thing, based on his reason that it's as if you're building a world when you have a child. You're contributing to the human race, the society. So that's so since he basically doesn't learn. In other words, we ask, why does he speak very different than the way the Talmud is speaking? Not only in the reason, but even just the structure of saying, if you had children, continue having. Why does he say it differently? Because he is not quoting that Talmud. He's not basing off that Talmud. He's really, it's his own idea, so to speak. Again, that is just an extension. So that's why he writes it very different than the way it's written in the Talmud. Just an interesting fact, and we'll finish with that. Again, there's two times the Torah says be fruitful and multiply. One in after Adam and Eve were created, right in the beginning, have children. And the next one was, like I said, by when Noah, after the flood, Noah and his 3 sons, God commanded them to have children. Now, if you look in many of the times it's quoted, oh, there's a mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply. Which time do they quote from the Bible, from the Torah? Which one? They specifically quote the second one from Noah. Now, obviously, you would assume, what do you mean? Like, every time you hear the mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply, you're like, yeah, it's in the first chapter or whatever. It's like right in the beginning of the Torah. It says that God told Adam to have children. So why do they quote the second time when it's from Noah? So based on this, we can understand. It's like a hint. It's a hinting to us this idea. How does it hint us this idea? Again, that it's having more children as an extension of this being fruitful and multiplying. Because who did God command to have children the second time? Noah and his 3 sons. Now, yeah, Noah's 3 sons didn't have children yet, but Noah had children, and God still commanded him to be fruitful and multiply. So you see that the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiplied extends to having many children, not just the basic amount, but rather to having many children. The Torah says there's a commandment, be fruitful and multiply. It's all part of the same mitzvah. That's why they quote specifically the second one, to hint to you that idea that the mitzvah, that this mitzvah being fruitful and multiply, yes, the biblical obligation is son, daughter, but it really does extend to having many more children. You're when you do that, you're doing that mitzvah. Yeah, maybe you're not obligated on a biblical level, but you're definitely doing that mitzvah by having as many children as possible. And the rabbis just, nicked it up from being, that you're doing the mitzvah to making it an actual obligation to have as many children as possible. That's just a cute, interesting, like after everything we explained, we can now understand maybe why they quote specifically the verse from the after the flood, again, because it brings out that Noah already had children, and still God was commanding him to be fruitful and multiply. In other words, showing us that to have many children is part of that mitzvah. And that's how the Rambam learns it, that it's an extension of that mitzvah. And therefore, he doesn't write this clearly, but he doesn't write the opposite either, that when it comes to someone who wants to sell a Torah, needs to sell a Torah to have more children, it would be allowed. Unlike other opinions which say that you cannot sell a Torah. Again, the Ram doesn't write clear that you could, but he doesn't write that you can't. And we're assuming that he would say you're allowed to, because it's all an extension of that mitzvah of being fruitful and multiply. So that is the topic for today. We discussed again this idea of having more than just a son and a daughter, more than just a biblical obligation. Where does it come from? The Talmud writes one reason. Again, because maybe children will pass away. Maimonides has a different reason about that every soul you bring to this world is as if you're building a whole new world just with that person. And based on those reasons, that would tell you, is it a separate obligation or it's part of an extension of the mitzvah being fruitful and multiply, and that even has a practical implication also. So yeah, thank you all for joining. I hope you enjoyed. If anyone have any questions, feel free to ask. And looking forward. There's a Tani class tonight at 7 o'clock. They're having Jason Greenblatt. He's coming to the synagogue at 7:30. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut the Tani class, I guess, a little short. We'll do it from 7 to 7:30, and then whoever comes to the synagogue can hop right over to Jason Greenblatt's talk. So a little extra incentive.
I have a question.
Yeah,
I have
sure.
a question. Does that include adopted children? Is that counting if you can't have children, but you adopt children? Does that count as a mitzvah?
I don't know as a fact, I never read about that specifically, but based on the little that I know, I would assume that, again, specifically in regards to this mitzvah, it would not be fulfilling it. It's something very important. It's something very, I'm sure that it definitely checks off a lot of other mitzvahs, but not this specific one. I don't think so. Again, but I'm not saying this as a fact, because I admit I lack a lot of knowledge, and this is one of the one of those pieces. Yeah. Anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, I have a short one. So in practical terms, would you be able to?
Oh, for some reason I can't hear you. It's not loud enough.
Now? Can you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you now? I cannot hear you now.
Paul, one more time. What did you say?
So now can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so my question is, in practical terms, would you be able to sell a Sefer Torah to get married?
So again, if someone doesn't have any children, for sure.
No, I mean after that.
After having a son and a daughter, so it depends if you say the law like Maimonides or not. It's a discussion. If you look in the Shulchan Aruch, it's a whole discussion. If you want, I can check it up for you to find out like the final law. But I'm saying even in the Shulchan Aruch, you'll see there's different opinions, and there's no one person that says this is the law. It's more like if you ask a rabbi, they'll tell you based on everything what the.
That's what I was going to say that. Yeah, you should ask your rabbi, right?
Yeah, that's basically what it was. No, that's what it would be.